and welcome to Unplanned, the show about cities and how they work. I'm Sam, your host, and today on Unplanned, we're going to dive deep into some data with a great tour guide, Joe Minicozzi, who's a principal at Urban3. He's an urban designer with a connection to the Boston area as well. I'll let him tell you all about that. And without further ado, Joe, welcome to Unplanned.
Thanks, Sam.
All right, Joe. So I've seen some of your work and you've got so much stuff. But today I think we're gonna look at some county level data based where you are. And you're based in Asheville, North Carolina. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about where you're based, about Urban3, kind of get us situated. And then let's dive right into what you're looking at, because it's absolutely fascinating. And it gets right at the issue of equity and fairness from the tax assessor's role. So Joe, tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into the data.
Well, thanks, Sam. I'm trained as an architect initially. I went to the University of Miami for architecture. And, back then in those days, we were toying with this stuff called new urbanism. But I grew up in upstate New York, the Rust Belt, that actually had urbanism, but we destroyed it. So it was kind of weird to me that here we are reinventing urbanism again, and somehow that's flashy and new. But I also understood in the sprawl of Florida that there's a reason why you need to put different rules in place. Flash forward, I went to the GSD. I got an urban design degree with concentration in real estate development. I actually worked in John Hancock in the tower for a little while. And what was fascinating to me was being on the inside of all this stuff. Also, even in grad school, the incredible sophistication at which that program, MIT, all of these programs are really heady. And the process of development and design decisions and conversation at the Boston level are really high as well. But how does that translate? And a lot of that was just trying to figure out for myself is I'm not that sophisticated. So how do I teach myself this stuff? But flash forward, coming out into working in the South in smaller markets, there's a need for explaining things.
So take us into today's story. What are we going to be looking at today?
We're going to be looking at what's going on inside our tax system, and I would argue is today's version of redlining. There's a system of taxation, or at least accounting inside tax assessment of policies called neighborhood codes, which are basically they define certain accounting that happens in tax assessment, how your land is valued. If you're paying property tax, there's a direct correlation between the value of the built environment and its productivity. And there's also biases that go in it that subsidize sprawl. So if we're not seeing how things are priced, we don't understand how the transactions happen. So the metaphor that I'll use, or the analogy, is could you imagine like government, we're essentially sitting there at the cash register checking things out as people buy stuff. But if the bananas are priced at $50 a banana and the potato chips are priced at 10 cents a bag, what do you think the consumer is going to do? They're going to choose the potato chips. It might not be better for us from a health standpoint, but that's going to cause a change in the transaction. So to use that in a planning perspective, when you tax on value, there's a perverse incentive to build junk. It has no connection to what's the cost of that street in front of you, what's the cost of the pipe in front of the end of the street, what's the cost of the garbage truck to go by. So that's the reason why you see big cheap boxes happening in sprawl. So this is really simply showing non-taxable in gray. Green is low value, purple is high value. So if you just took a look at the county and said, okay, there's a big purple splotch right here. I've got no value. This is a big Mount Mitchell State Park or federal park. The Blue Ridge Parkway comes through town, and that's Mount Pisgah. So there's two mountains with two huge forests in it, non-taxable. So I'll just be crude, doesn't give me money. Green is low value, purple is high value. So that's the Biltmore estate. That's America's largest house. That one house is worth $100 million for one house.
Is it
cool?
Is it privately owned and taxable,
it's private,
or is it?
It's privately owned and taxable. Yes.
Interesting. Okay.
But Sam, here's the thing. It's a 180,000 square foot house sitting on 8,000 acres of land. So when we talk about cars, do we talk about them in miles per tank? No. So why do we, all real estate is different sizes. So rather than total value, let's do value per acre. So this is where you understand the productivity of that land use.
Okay.
Now it completely changes the map, but let me just show it to you in 3D.
Okay, so now hang on. Go slow so we can follow. You've just gone through two graphics. What are we, where are you going to
Total,
deposit us now? So this was
total
what we were
value.
looking at.
Yep.
And then what was the next one?
This is total value or
Yeah.
miles per tank.
Yeah.
This is value per acre or miles per gallon. This is where
Yeah.
using land is the unit of qualifier, right?
Okay. Okay.
And then same information in 2D and in the same information in 3D,
Okay.
right? This is just the same map. It's just done in 3D. This is how you communicate. I run into people that are cartographers and they're like, can't you see my map? And I'm like, I have no idea what you're looking at. You know, it's just, but when you see it in 3D using that Z coordinate, you can really see the difference between red and purple, right? So help the viewer see this quickly. Now, when I'm presenting this to an audience, and I have to realize that we're all county taxpayers. Now down here, I've got 2 voters out in the county for every 1 voter in the city, right? So politically, they always win. In fact, one of our state representatives called our downtown a cesspool of sin. And I'm like, really?
Well, hang on. So part of what you're getting at here is that a lot of the value in the county is in those spikes, in those tall towers, if you will, which is the downtown, as I'm understanding it.
So from a planning perspective, basically you're not getting a lot of money out of that suburban development. So let's just call it what it is. It's not productive, period. I understand it's happening, but our tax system is basically undertaxing that and overtaxing the downtown. So we could either do more downtown stuff or stop doing so much of the sprawl stuff.
But is it implied that in the public discussions, in the community meetings, there's a belief that the suburban sprawl is really driving a lot of this local economy and it's really producing a lot of this tax revenue? But when you look at the data, that's not the case. Is that fair? Is that accurate?
It's totally accurate. Here's the building that we renovated on the right. That's we did retail on the ground floor, office on the second floor, and residential above it. $11 million. And I mean, seriously, I sat in meetings where people were like, well, Joe, that's $11 million. We got this Walmart that's 20 million. It's like, got it. It's 20 million. Yeah, but it took 34 acres of my city to make that happen versus our 0.2 acres. Per acre, we're 100 times more property tax productive, double the retail taxes. We've got a lot more residents and more jobs. So this is where our biases of how we have a conversation can actually steer us to misinformation. So taking that bias of bigger buildings more expensive, it is, but you've got to bring the land into it because cities are finite boundaries of lands, counties too. You know, your Middlesex County isn't going to annex the next county over. You know, the land is the land. So understanding how its productivity is, or conversely, understand the low productivity of that Walmart. Now, in defense of Walmart, I'm not going to bash them too much. I actually went to a presentation. It was a assessors conference presentation, and the head of Walmart got up and did this amazing presentation on how cheap his buildings are. Think about that. You have all of these assessors, and they're like, great, they're throwaway crappy buildings. So I went up to the microphone and asked him during Q&A, I said, what's the useful life of one of your buildings? He goes, 15 years. We're designing the building to depreciate it as fast as possible. We'll build another building and depreciate it down again. The buildings are throwaway for us. So in his defense, if you built a system based on valuation, yes, build a cheap building. You pay lower taxes. It has nothing to do with consumption. This is Kansas City Metro. You can tell we're downtown Kansas City.
Sorry, we're Kansas City, Missouri, right?
Kansas City, Missouri is over here.
Got it.
And once you cross this river right here, this is Kansas City, Kansas.
Got it.
But y'all can see right there. Sorry, I use the word y'all. I've been living down here a little bit too long. It's a very efficient word. But you can see this plateau right there. We knew as soon as we did this map, we knew what the problem was. And so here we are. This is a 2019 map.
Okay.
This is the red line map.
Just spend a minute on this map we're looking at right now. First of all, what map is this? What are we looking at here?
It's called the home HOLC map. So actually let's kind of take a little bit of a step out. In 1934, the Federal Housing Administration, basically our federal government changed mortgages from 7-year mortgages to 30-year mortgages. And they're just like, we need to get more people into housing. and become homeowners. A lot of this is because we were freaked out about socialism that was happening in Europe. So it's like, let's just make more ownership class. If we have that, there'll be less socialist. It was that simple. Ironically, it was the FDR administration that pushed that through. But in that, by changing mortgages, and that's a huge change from 7 years to 30 years, right? They couldn't do everything top down. So they said, you all locally, any city, 50,000 people in less or in more, had to create a map that was graded in 4 categories. So good investment, you could get a mortgage. Desirable, you could get a mortgage. Declining, it's going to be a toss up. And hazardous was no way, can't get a mortgage. Now,
So, and
hazardous,
I'm going to pause you. So localities had to literally map their communities on a physical map, on a 2-dimensional map, and then give it one of these ABCD valuations on
correct.
the map, each neighborhood, each community within the community.
Yeah, and it was basically a self-inflicted wound. But you think of the power of who was doing that in those locations at that time. This is 1934. Hazardous was, you had to measure your, in their words, Negro population. So if you were Black, your neighborhood was redlined. You were removed from the mortgage system. The other ones they went after were the infiltration of immigrants. Now, the immigrants that were coming in 1930, the top class were Italians, people like me. We were considered hazardous. Number 2 were Germans. Which Germans were coming into our country in 1930? Oh, that would be called Jewish people. So what you find when you look at these maps, the neighborhoods, here's Asheville's map, the neighborhoods that were redlined, that were carved up, this is a Black neighborhood, this big horseshoe that goes under downtown right here. You know, in Kansas City, they let's go back to theirs real quick. In Kansas City, the red line map was Black neighborhoods, which were predominantly on the east side. The northeast side were Italians. Now, as an Italian, however, sometimes you could find Italian neighborhoods that were yellow class, so I could just move over there, or I could change my name to Smith. You know, it's like I could blend in as a white person. Black people can't change their skin. So that's the nefarious part about this. From 1934 until the Fair Housing Act of 1968, those families in those locations were disconnected from the equity system of mortgages.
So if we go back to your 3-dimensional representation, is that what we're looking at basically? Is that what the story was behind this?
Well, the story that we wanted to get them to understand is that there's a residual effect that happens because a lot of number of different things that happen. And one of the things that we see as the economic indicator is vacant land. So if you look at the red line neighborhoods, how did that house fall down? Well, that house fell down because for 30 years, somebody couldn't get money to improve it, or you couldn't sell it. You would leave it to your kids. Your kids would be like, I'm out of here. I don't want to live in Kansas City anymore. It's racist. I'll move to Chicago. And then they'll just rent it out, but they're not paying attention to the house. They can't put money back into it. They can't collect enough rents. You'd find that cities were disinvesting in the infrastructure. They weren't putting trees in these neighborhoods. They weren't fixing streets. So meanwhile, once you lose that house, you go from your property tax has dirt tax and a building sitting on top of it. If you lose that building, you get very little taxes out of it. So in the scale of, you take all the non-tax, all the vacant land in Kansas City, Kansas, and squeeze it together, it's 3 square miles of real estate and 7 square miles in Missouri. It's insane how much land has a pipe, a road, a garbage truck, a snowplow, go and buy it with no house on it.
How common or prevalent is this Kansas City story across America? I mean, we're just talking about every community of 50,000 people basically had this same story.
Every community.
Right.
In my hometown, it happened too. There were biased decisions made on what were good neighborhoods and what were bad neighborhoods that were given access to mortgages and weren't, even though my hometown never got over 30,000 people. So this was an industry standard that started at the federal government and worked its way through every community. In some communities, they would deed restrict the properties. And you find this happened even in Kansas City on the south side in the Green Line neighborhoods. Those could get mortgages, but they were deed restricted so Jewish people couldn't live there. So it wasn't part of the home mortgage industry. This was a self-inflicted wound that happened by the real estate developer J.C. Nichols, who actually wrote the deeds once they did the developments. So it's a much more complex system, but it happened across the country. And remember, this is a federally secured system of mortgages and money that is being given to people locally. I'm going to throw something at you because it's like, a lot of people are just like, well, Joe, this is depressing.
It is a little sad. I'm going to say, I mean, beyond its implications.
And there's also like this kind of white fragility of people just don't want to talk about it. And they're like, well, I'm not, Joe, look, this is the 1968 stop. That was 50 years ago. You need to stop being accusatory or whatever. It's like, all right, fine. Let's just put the whole redlining thing aside and just look at how we're paying taxes. So this is what we did here locally. Let me show you this. This is my house, this brown house. I live upstairs and rent out the downstairs. It's a 1915 house. It's really cool. It's got a great porch. My neighbors, the Lordmans, Black family, Vietnam War veteran, retired. Let's just see how the tax system works for the Lordmans. A lot of these biases that I'm about to show you are in all of the systems across the country. Right. So if you just look at the dirt value per acre, the building per square foot, and then in North Carolina, our reassessments happen every 4 years. So from one assessment to this assessment, Mr. Lordman's property went up 117%. So 17% above what it was before. That's the growth in value. Got it. Okay, so that's the amount of taxes he's paying have grown at 17%. Now his income isn't, remember, it's fixed. Right. So let's go from that to over at the country club. This is a house on the 9th hole facing the green. It's a really nice 1920s Tudor house. It's really cool. In our world, having a view of a mountain is like having a view of the bay. It's like, that's good real estate. It's also got underground utilities. Those aren't cheap. My neighborhood doesn't have that. So when you just stop at the tax bill and you just say, okay, the taxable value is 500,000, which in my community, that's expensive. Maybe not in Boston, but there you go. Upper middle class. Going back to those three numbers, the dirt value is 450,000, 107 bucks a square foot, 6% change. So this is what they're paying in county tax. Now remember, we pay a city tax on top of that, but let's put that aside. That's what the county gets. They're the ones doing the assessment. Let's bring the Lordmans back into this. How on God's green earth is Mr. Lordman's dirt worth 10% more than having that incredible view in a really nice street? How is Mr. Lordman's house 20 bucks more a square foot? Would you look at these two pictures and go, definitely, Mr. Lordman's house is definitely more valuable per square foot?
What is the answer to that? Because those numbers, those facts are just mind-boggling. And I think when we talked earlier, this just left me scratching my head. So help us understand it. How does that happen?
Well, hang on. Yeah. Well, first, shame on us as planners for not looking at this and not understanding the economics of this. It's like, again, we have our hands at the cash register and we are moving the goods across the scanner and we're never asking how these things are priced. So look at this, a 19% change in Mr. Lordman's property, only a 6% change. And Mr. Lordman's paying $1,000, not more, but hold on, let's go to the top of the mountain. So this is oceanfront real estate, as far as we're concerned. Top of a mountain, 360-degree views all over the place. And here's a house. This is one of my favorite houses. It's got a tennis court on top of the mountain because, Sam, we all need our own tennis court. We don't need to go play tennis with the great unwashed down in the valley, right? So probably a rich house. Right. When you look at the dirt value per acre, how on God's green earth is a mountaintop property $80,000 an acre?
I agree. How is that possible?
I don't know. The law says you're supposed to look at the zoning. Notice that it has the opportunity for 6 units up here. Why did the assessor choose to not put that full value into the property? I don't know. When you look at the taxes per acre, he's paying 5,000 and Mr. Lordman's paying double that. So how did you just miss the 6 units an acre? And then when you talk to the assessor's like, well, Joe, look, it's a steep slope up there. It's like, all right, let's look at the whole top of the mountain. This is that block that's up there, him and all of his neighbors. And so did this person not have the ability to build on a steep slope? I mean, they did a smaller lot and so did all these other people. These are all small lots. Or what about the damn tennis court? That's flat, And so when you look at the dirt value of him versus his neighbor, Just crossing the property line, it goes up to $439,000. What's up with that?
And that's his neighbor. That's his direct neighbor. That's his abutter.
Yeah.
So is the abutter upset by this fact that he's being taxed at this, I assume, a much higher?
We did leak this to somebody else on the block, but this person over here at Fort Crowning Way, that's $484,000 an acre for the dirt. What is that? 20 times more or something.
Well, what is your conclusion? Is this just the rules are crazy and that's what happens when you have crazy rules, or is it what's going on? It is a little
well
perplexing.
There's opacity, there's bias, there's the way that the standards are functioning. The critical questions that we're not asking. There's lots of things that go into this. This is on the right is Donald Trump's attorney, Sidney Powell. Compared in Biltmore Forest, compared to one of my friends, Reggie Harrell, who lives in the black neighborhood on the left, right next to her neighborhood. They're about maybe a half mile away from each other. Reggie's house is $125 a square foot, and Sidney Powell's is $107 a square foot. And I know on the property card, Sidney Powell renovated her house. So when you look at the taxes, Reggie's paying more taxes. We showed this to the assessor, and the assessor had a coronary with me. He's like, look, Joe, you're not being fair. Sidney Powell has more square feet. You know that on the more square feet that you get, the lower the per square foot value it is. I'm like, where do you get that? She's got 4 bathrooms in her house. So that's your bias saying that there's like some scale factor that the house gets cheaper the more real estate you get. Where do you get that? But again, who's asking in that question? And secondly, how on God's green earth is it fair that Reggie's property is going up 266%? So this is where we get into words like gentrification. We have these narratives of, hey, some white guy like me moved in next to a black person and I drove up the value. That's a really comforting narrative of white guilt to say that I'm the problem, without ever looking at the fact that there is a discount given to rich people. So one of the things that we did to show Keith this, let's see.
Well, and I'm going to say, help us make some sense of all this, because I think if we get too much data out there, it'll leave us with too many questions. So help us, as somebody once said, help us land this plane so we know where we're at.
Okay.
But this is incredible.
When you look at then there's these things called neighborhood codes. So we just mapped them. So these are all the different neighborhood codes within the Shiloh neighborhood. Now, why there's so many neighborhood codes, I can't tell you. Keith can't, our assessor can't tell us either. It's just a standard of practice that they have where they make a map of all these neighborhoods. So this is a different neighborhood from this beige one that's in here, right? According to the assessor. Now, as a city planner, we call this whole nub Shiloh. Yeah. Like that's the way that if you go to the Shiloh Neighborhood Association, that's the way they see it. Well, the assessor sees a completely different subsets of neighborhoods. But what you'll see here is that all the little neighborhood tracks in here have the same level. They're the same plateau. So the dirt value change from one assessment to the next is the exact same in all of these different things. Do you follow me there?
I think so. Yeah. I think I do. I'm not 100% sure I do, but why don't keep going and then I'll ask you.
Okay.
Questions. But yeah.
So we said to the assessor, we're like, okay, so if that's your standard of practice, when you cross the street right here and go into Sidney Powell's neighborhood of Biltmore Forest, you could see with your own 2 eyes, this green neighborhood down here in only 2 parcels got a change in dirt value, not the whole neighborhood. So why are you applying a pattern in one neighborhood and not in another? That is an arbitrary choice made by you that is not following. I don't understand what standard of practice you're following. And what it comes down to is that wealthy people are more apt to argue their assessment. So the assessors are way more careful in the rich neighborhoods and kind of sloppy in the poor neighborhoods. And that has a long-term effect. It's going to change the values faster and more, and it's going to apply things. So back to that house on top of the mountain. And the reason I showed you how weird it was next to its neighbors, this is the mountain right there with that square. Notice the yellow freckles all over it. So literally that house with the tennis court is its own separate tax neighborhood from all of his neighbors in blue. Where did that come from? Does this start to feel like redlining at all, or the reverse, a bonus for the wealthy?
So now I'm gonna ask you to step out of the data, because I think we've gotten a lot of data and it's very compelling, but at some level kind of frightening as well. You as an urban designer, you as somebody who works with communities and municipalities and clients, and you just as an active citizen, somebody who cares about your community, where do you go with all this? Like, what have you found out? What have you just discovered? Because this looks like you actually flipped open that dusty old book and all of a sudden you're seeing something. You brush the dust off and you're like, oh my gosh, here's that map from 1848 that everybody's been looking for. This is
Yeah.
crazy. I mean, it seems crazy. Now, maybe there's a rationale that somebody can tell me, tell me, but what's going on here, and what should be happening here?
Well, for one, I don't know why, like the assessor, and again, I don't want this to come off as like, shoot the assessor kind of thing. It's not fair.
No, no.
This is an individual that's working within a practice and habits.
Right.
And I would also argue, I'd rather throw your and my profession under the bus on this one. Why aren't planners asking these questions? Why is it that when it turns into valuation or finance or assessment, it's almost like that's a magic little world that doesn't exist to us? And yet we're operating in that market condition of what's happening with real estate. It's like, don't overcomplicate this. If we have to try to find ways to figure this out. So the first ways that in our firm, what we do is we make a map and we ask the question, like, why was this map never delivered to my elected officials? Because you and I could look at it and see these weird, just, you can see right here, why is like those two little parcels right there? Why are they a different color from all the blue stuff around it? It's like, let the information communicate to you so you can say your neighborhood map doesn't match the way that we look at neighborhood maps. So who's right here? And let's have that conversation. But to make it real, we have to make it visual. We have to put everybody on the same page, and making a map does that. So actually the assessor's report is 633 pages long. There is not a map anywhere in the document.
Just incredible. I mean, we talked to a couple months ago, and I was just fascinated by what you showed me. And I know this is not the only type of work you guys do, and all of it's just amazing. If people wanted to find out more about you and Urban3, where would they go to find you?
You can come to our website, urban3.com. There's also, you can find us. We have a YouTube channel with like a bunch of videos. I do a lot of lectures on the side. I lecture at universities on this. And when you can allow people to see the information, the great majority of us will move forward. Now we've all witnessed with COVID and the experience of people not taking scientific data with climate change and whatever. It's just, but
that's been a problem. I will agree.
But I'd like to argue that again, we failed to communicate it or reach those people. We do a lot of work in Middle America, in red parts of the country, and ironically, we're better received in those communities than the much more blue parts of our country. And it's just, we try to challenge people's biases with information and show the information, but it's up to the community and the citizen to take that and do something with it.
Go Minicozzi, Urban3. I know there's so much more we could talk about, but we don't have the time in this episode to do it. So maybe we can get back to another one. I just want to thank you again. I mean, it's fascinating, and I hope people do go to the Urban3 website and check you out, check out your work, and reach out to you if they